you find it online?
Yeah, maybe I
Col
can answer by voice. It will be easier. But I just found the group because I was looking about SharePoint stuff in general, and this topic is interesting me. So on Meetup, it was easy to find some groups, and yeah, with the pandemic, it's
Awesome.
obvious.
That's
Yeah, I'm here.
That's wonderful. Well, I'm so glad. You know what? We put stuff out there and we never know whether, if I speak, I tweet about it, Jay will on LinkedIn, and then we've got Meetup, and it's nice to know how people are finding our group. That's important. Ontario, wow, and California, Colorado, woohoo. I'm so glad you guys can join us. We have a pretty, we aren't as big a city as, LA or Chicago or, New York or anything like that. But I would say for a Midwestern city, we have a pretty dedicated group of people that have been joining our group for a long, long time. So we're glad that you guys can join us, and hopefully you can continue to join us. Like Ajay said, even as even before COVID, we tried to do events that were if someone was presenting, we still try and had it streaming, even if they're in person. So, okay, Ajay is back in. All right, Ajay, are you able to, he's typing. All right, are we recording now, Ajay?
Yes, I was able to kick off recording, so we are all
Oh,
set.
okay. All right. I was trying to stall a little bit. So before we start, okay, very good. Thank you. All right. Well, that's me. I do stuff. There's my company. If you want to reach out to me, I don't have it in my slides because I don't like to get spammed, but you guys can reach out to me or send me, contact me on my website if you want to reach out. All right, so the purpose of this presentation is really, this is not a how-to. This is not how to build a Power App, how to build a flow. That's not the purpose of this. To me, this was a fun project that I worked on. The purpose of this really is to to sort of jog your imagination. When you're a kid and you had those little blocks and you could build something out of it, anybody can build any number of things. My kids have these toys called magnetiles, and they're little plastic toys with magnets on it, but they don't repel each other. I don't know how they figured it out, but every single magnet sticks to all the other ones, and it's so neat seeing how they can each. I've got 3 kids, and each of them will build drastically different things: a parking garage, a hotel, a cathedral, whatever. So that's kind of the idea here. Is I think we all know the workloads that are part of Microsoft 365, but the purpose of this is just to show one way that this can be, all these different parts can be glued together to have a unified process. So that's what I hope you get out of it. I don't think anybody's going to duplicate the entire process I'm putting out here, but the idea is that maybe you can say, oh, I never really thought about doing that part before, and maybe you can incorporate it in an existing process you have, and it may or may not even be the HR process. So I just want to sort of lay out the scenario here. This was a solution that I did build for one of my existing clients. They had a Nintex solution, Nintex workflows in an on-premises environment, and we wanted to rebuild it using Power Automate. During this process, they were also in preparation for migrating from SharePoint on-premises up to Teams and SharePoint Online. And so this was part of a bigger process. They already had a pretty involved process in Nintex that we are sort of trying to replicate. The idea here, because it's an HR system, I clearly can't duplicate the whole system for you guys or show you the system. So what I have here is a very quick and dirty, I sort of recreated it in a very minimalistic way. So here we go with this sort of the scenario that we're laying out. I just wanted to say this whole presentation is built on a real solution, even if you're not looking at the real solution. So when we look at the scenario, we have recruiters at a company, and the recruiters go through and they screen candidates and send them through the hiring process. So part of the trickiness here is the fact that employees are okay, Larita, I'm glad I'm hitting it. You're saying that it's where your scenario is. I love it. I love it. I love it. It's nice when something is relevant. Good. So candidates will go through what's tricky is if they're not officially employees yet, you have this sort of pre-employee state that they're in, which is they've maybe had a verbal conversation, but you still have to even get the official offer letter signed. You have to do background reports and stuff like that. Once they become an employee, they need to have an account provision in Azure Active Directory. They need to have a license provision in Microsoft 365. And additionally, the IT department wants to have a checklist did we remember to set up their monitor and their, assign a public phone number and stuff like that. Additionally, various stakeholders need to know that somebody got hired, what their start date is, etc. So in this example, we're going to as I mentioned before, we're going to be working with these various workloads in Microsoft 365, including SharePoint Online, Planner, the Power Platform of Power Apps, Power Automate, Azure AD, Exchange, Teams, Yammer, Office Online, and Search. So this is, like you say, it's going to touch on all of these, but they're all geared towards a single purpose of onboarding employees. So if we look at the background and technologies, the first thing to note is that I am under no illusion that SharePoint is the primary system of record, predominantly for human resources systems. Very often people have Workday or an Oracle system, or I don't remember all the different flavors out there, Dynamics, whatever it is, not Dynamics, I guess. Anyhow, I know there's a lot of HR specific platforms that people use. So in our scenario, even if it's something as simple as the security team keeps track of parking garage transponders, right? Like if you need to get in the parking garage, that's owned by the security team, which is overseen by property management. So whether it's this client in particular has software for like hoteling and keeping track of org charts and stuff like that. So in this scenario, there was value of having a SharePoint list of employees. But that being said, it needed to interact with these other systems. And in some cases, it is still manual, right? Not every platform has APIs that can connect to Power Automate. If they can, that's great. In our case, not everything had that. But the idea here is this is where I have the SharePoint list is a record of employees. There was value in having a one list where that you could actually see everybody who was a past employee, everybody who's a current employee, what was the day that they were hired, what the day that they were ended their termination date, etc. Azure Active Directory is the identity management. In the system that I worked with, we actually still had on-premises Active Directory. And so what that meant was we actually had to do an extra step to actually reach into the on-premises Active Directory and add that user account. And I'll talk about that when we get there. But in this scenario, we're going to sort of simplify it and just assume we're adding them right to Azure Active Directory. The other thing here is that each department has a team. In our existing scenario, previously there are SharePoint sites set up for each department. And so in this scenario, each prime person gets hired and we know which department they're hired in as. The code should actually go in and make them a member of that Microsoft team for that department. In terms of business requirements, the HR team wanted to have a way of tracking tasks. So these tasks, like you say, they could be everything from make sure you collect their T-shirt size and give them their free T-shirt to set up a meet and greet with their manager and things like that. So some of them are sort of automated tasks that we're doing in our system, but a lot of these were just, can you remember to reach out to this person and make sure this thing gets done? Did we figure out where they're going to sit in the, which cubicle they have, et cetera? The other thing that was kind of interesting is the fact that if you think about that process, there's a lot of stuff happened when an employee was first onboarded that didn't need to be retained. So again, did they get the parking transponder? Did they get their T-shirt? Did they? Trying to think of other kind of things. If like IT department was setting up a monitor, how many monitors do they want? Things like that, really they're used at the beginning. But once they're in the beginning, they get put into the other system. Did you add them to the HR system, right? And things like that. So there was information that my client was previously retaining, but it didn't need to be retained. It was like, it was information that, you know, maybe their t-shirt size when they first get hired, but after that, if they want to order it, they can order it through the online store. We didn't need to keep that information. Or if they're given that parking transponder, now the security team has that in their system. It's not really the company's responsibility to keep track of that. So it really was a lot of extraneous information was getting stored with that primary record. So in this scenario, basically what we wanted to do is sort of split out the record that had all that sort of extra stuff that's relevant just to new hire, and then sort of strip it out so that that permanent record didn't have all that extra stuff that was really only temporary in nature. And then finally, like we mentioned, there need to be notifications when somebody is hired. So this is where the scenario we laid out. So to start with, we have a list in SharePoint that's a new hire list. And this is where you're going to keep track of sort of that temporary list. Like you say, some of the data could be temporary, or it could be somebody that you're onboarding and then they decide they don't, maybe they fail the background check or they turn down the offer or whatever. Maybe they never materialize into a full employee. So this is that first step when you're first going through that candidate process. Well, what happens is when a new hire, we have another, when a new item is added to that list, it's going to kick off a workflow. If you don't mind, I apologize, guys. There's a little bit of background noise, so I'm going to mute everybody. And if you need to get unmuted, please feel free to unmute. There's just it's a little distracting. So, okay. So we wanted to be able to create a new bucket for each employee within the new hire plan. So the idea is that every time, if you're going to hire John Doe will get a bucket. And then we want to have a certain set of tasks. Well, rather than hard coding those tasks in Power Automate, I started thinking about it and I'm like, you know what, it'd be nice if there was like a template that got used and if that template was editable. So in fact, what I did is I created a list in SharePoint that lists out what are the tasks, including is this task have a description? Does it have an attachment field? Should it be assigned to a particular person? What's the order of the task? And that way, the HR team, if they decide they need to add, remove, or modify a task, they can go into that planner task list and it'll change sort of that template. So what the flow is going to go do is when a new hire is added to that new hire list, it's going to go look at that planner task list and create a bucket for that person and then add the task to the task list. Now, when we look at this, essentially that new hire list is just a data source. So if you're in the HR department, you're not going to use that new hire list. You're going to use the Power App to view the list and to view the candidates and the people in that list. And then finally, we aren't expecting users to go right to the planner or to the Power App, but in fact, we're going to be surfacing that information as tabs within Teams. And that way, when the HR department is living in Teams, they can still access all that information. All right, so this is my nice little warning here that this is a demo. So this is not, just please know that when I built the real solution, and when you're building a solution, you're going to want to have things like error handling and make your variables have the right names and whatever. So like you say, I sort of was sketching out all these pieces, but this is really broad brushstroke. So please don't hate me again if you see stuff that is not best practice, because the purpose of this was not to make a pixel perfect rendition of this. Please know that our production version is a little more airtight than this. So just again, don't skewer me. All right, so let's look at a demo here of how this works. All right. So here we go. In the HR department, we've got this employee management team. So in here, this is the underlying SharePoint list of new hires. So this is the information that's actually getting stored within SharePoint. This typically wouldn't be shown to the HR people. I just wanted you to be able to see it. So really what they're going to get to is this Power App. For this Power App, if you look at a new hire, you can go in and you can see their first name, last name, birthday, department, etc. You can edit the information, and in fact, you can view the tasks that have been associated with that user. So this is not the place where you would actually manipulate the tasks, but at least you get a sort of a snapshot of how far are we along the process, how many have completed and how many are outstanding. In here, this is our list of planner tasks. So this is this sort of editable list. As you can see here, I can go in here, I can add a description. I can specify who is assigned to. If there's attachment URL, I can give the name and URL of that, and the order of it. So what happens is if we go into the plan, we can see our buckets that are laid out here for each individual user. And you can see here how for each of these items, if there is a link that was added to it, that is actually getting picked up from the list, and the person it's assigned to is based on information at that planner task list itself. A couple things to note is that, sorry, I like to pull this up. Thank you, Ajay. I love the encouragement. So the idea here is that within this plan, sorry, losing my train of thought here. When it provisions items, it doesn't provision them from top down. It adds each task as the most recent from the bottom up. So when you're provisioning the tasks from this list, I wanted the HR department to be able to specify an order, but when you're creating the task, you have to invert the order. So it creates 4, 3, 2, 1. Otherwise, they're going to be in reverse order. The second thing I did within the plan was in my solution, again, not demoing here, but just want to talk through it, is I actually created a list of dependencies. So I had not only an order, but I had a group number. For group 1 and group 2 and group 3, I had an order. And then I basically, in my flow, is saying, if this task has a dependency on another one, if that task is created, then provision the next group. So for example, if you have an item that says perform a background check, once they mark that item as complete, that we performed the background check, it would actually provision a new task that said, communicate the results of the background check to the employee. So in our case, we had like 15 or 20 tasks. It just made sort of an overwhelming list if you saw all of them. And some of them aren't necessary. In other words, some of them were dependent on the person giving a written acceptance. Like it doesn't go any further until they give a written acceptance. And so when they check the, sign the DocuSign file, then it would provision the rest of the task. So that was another neat little thing, is being able to have sort of that kind of like project, right? Like those dependencies that were built in. So let's go in here. Oh, let me all right, I'm going to move to the next so you guys can sort of see what's happening behind the scenes in Power Automate here. We'll walk through it and then we'll finally do it. So you just can see what all those moving parts are. So what happens is when a new hire item is created, what it's going to go through is it's going to create the bucket for that employee. And then it's going to go through and it's going to update the item for that in that new hire list with a bucket ID. That's because that's what we're using in the Power App to say, grab all the items in this particular bucket in this plan when we surface it within that Power App. And then I go through and I get the items from that planner task list. And as you can see here, I'm using that order column descending. So again, I'm reversing the order, so it's in reverse order. And then I go through and I create a task for each of the items within my list. Now, even though in my list I have assigned 2 for each of them in the real solution that I built, basically they had multiple recruiters. So I had logic that said, if that assigned to is empty, then assign it to whoever created the item in the new hire list. Otherwise, use a hard-coded person. So that way you could say, if I'm recruiter A and I am hiring this person, then I'm the one that needs to follow up with them. But within that that list I had here, so in my scenario, some of them would be empty. They wouldn't have an assigned to, but you could say, you know, if it's set up monitors or something like that, maybe that's always one person. So it actually kind of provided the flexibility of saying, you know, in this case, there's no assigned to, so that would be the person who created the item. Otherwise, these other people be sort of hard coded to assign to them. So again, it's kind of neat what you can do when you think about the flexibility of this. When you're creating tasks, you can't actually, in the create option, you don't have the ability of adding attachments or a description. So I actually went through and just did sort of a case statement here that said, you know, if my template, that SharePoint list is saying there's an attachment that should be associated with it, then let's update the task details with that attachment. Has a description been populated? If so, then let's go and update this description for it as well. So that's the flow that's going to execute. So let's go back to our team. If I can figure out what window it's in. All right. So let's give an example. So we're going to hire Adam Wainwright. I don't know what his birthday is. How old is the man? We'll say he's 43. How old is he?
Wow. I would say Adam's more like, what, 38?
He just turned 40 a couple weeks ago.
40.
Oh,
Holy
okay. What a baby. Okay. All right. Okay, so here we go, 1981, right? Okay. He's gonna have an extra large. He's a big dude, right? Okay. We're gonna put him in the IT department because he's one of us. And he'll start on the last day of the month. Now, this is an example again where, you know, maybe they've gone through and they've added it, you know, in the HR system, his ID is 678. We have not issued a security badge, and his office is let's number. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to save the item. And now what should happen is when we go to the plan, it's going to take a minute for that to execute, for the flow to execute. There he is. It got added to the SharePoint list. You can see here the bucket is still empty. So it means the flow hasn't executed yet because we're still waiting for that to happen. As we know, these things can take some time. Let's go back to our flow and see if I was lucky at my last presentation. It did it kind of fast, but you know, as we know, it can take, oh, now it's running. Okay, 4 seconds ago. There we go. We got the bucket ID there, so we know it got created, and ta-da, there is our planner task that got created for that. So again, if I was going through and I could say, you know what, I've uploaded it, he's accepted the verbal offer, okay. Then we go into back to our Power App. We look at his record. If I look at view tasks, I can actually see what's been outstanding and what's completed. Ta-da! All right, any questions about that? All right, then I will continue on to our next step in the process. So let's imagine that we've gotten beyond the new hire process, and now we're actually going to, the person has you've set a start date. I was going to say, usually that's a criteria, is we have an actual start date. Keep in mind, I'm not keeping track of like social security numbers and other PII. That should be in the HR system. I'm not advocating that you store that in SharePoint. This really is just it's like a tracking list of employees, right? So I'm saying there's other information you probably need before you hire someone, but in terms of provisioning accounts, we ask the recruiters, please don't make them an employee until you have an official start date for them. So what's going to happen is they're going to click a button within the Power App that says, I am ready to employify my candidate. They will become an employee. So what that do is it will actually copy the record down to that employee list. When this happens, a flow is going to execute on employee created or modified, and it's going to do a number of things. It's going to add that user to Azure Active Directory, and then it's also going to look at their department and decide what group they need to be added to. which Office 365 group they need to be added to, with the assumption that each team, is driven by that group, right? So if we put them in the IT group, Office 365 group, it will add them to the IT team. Additionally, as we mentioned, that IT department wanted a checklist. The interesting thing about this requirement is after I built this really cool, like planner, task generation thing, I was like, why don't you guys want to use that too? They said, well, in our case, we don't really care about due dates and who's assigned to. It's really one person and they're going to do all the tasks pretty much at the same time. This is really a QA step just to make sure we haven't forgotten a step. So we don't need notifications and all that stuff. And in fact, we need a persistent record that says, yes, we remember to do this. And I just thought that was interesting because to me, it reminds me that as technologists, sometimes we think that we have the perfect answer. But when they gave me that, the criteria, I was like, you know what, actually, a Word template was totally fine because it's a persistent record. You're going to do it all at once. And it really is something handy about as you go through a checklist going check, 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 and I'm done. Right? They didn't need that planner, those buckets are meant to be deleted. After someone has been onboarded and you've done everything, your planner would get very unwieldy if you had 37 people in there. So it really behooves you to go in and delete that plan after a while. So that was an interesting criteria. Just to note, if you're using that, the Word connector, it is a premium connector. So what I usually advocate for people is that you get one service account, you buy the per user plan for that service account, and you just make sure that action happens in the context of that user. And then you make sure that, when people are kicking off that workflow, that one user has the ability to do it. We're going to send an email to the people to notify them that somebody's has a start date. And then last thing is within Yammer, there's a way where we'll be able to say, hey, please welcome this new person. They're going to start on this and this date. The next thing about this that's sort of ancillary, but is kind of a fun thing, is the concept of using Microsoft Search to surface floor plans and being able to say where this employee is going to sit. Just by show of hands, is there anybody who has used floor plans in their organization? If you guys want to use your Teams raise a hand thing. Jay, does Microsoft use this? You're laughing.
We don't have it on the official tenant, but we do have it on our MTC demo tenant, and it is pretty cool. I did get a chance to play with it, and it's phenomenal in terms of how it works. But it has a lot of prerequisites that have to be configured first.
Yeah, that's what we'll walk through a little bit. It's a little bit kludgy, but it is really kind of neat. So is anybody else? So what the idea here is that essentially when you onboard the employee, if you saw I provided an office location number, and I'll walk through this in the demo, you can actually upload a Visio document, or it's a CAD file that says these are the location of my offices, and then it will match it up to the employee office number. And then when you do search for a person in the person search, you can actually get their office location on a little map, which is really cool. So it's not really part of employee onboarding, but it's one of those things where if you're adding that office number to the employee when you onboard it, it all just sort of magically works, which is kind of cool. So let's walk through the next part of our demo here. All right, so. All right, so if we go back to our example here, what happens here is when they're ready to create that employee record, they're going to click the Create Employee Record button. Now, in the solution that I built, I'd have sort of a diff thing going on, and for every single field, I actually go retrieve the record from the employee record list, and if it's not the same, I kind of show it in sort of a grayed out fashion, and then down here instead of create, it becomes update. And so that way, just a reminder if you're updating information, because some people, they may be like, well, I don't know their birthday yet, but they're starting tomorrow and they need a user account created. They might go ahead and say, can I go ahead and create the birthday? And then they go enter it here, and it's sort of a reminder. So I'm just saying, in a real world solution, I tried to keep track of sort of that synchronization process, because I know it's more than like a one-time process. Anyhow, so we go through, and we can see in our employees list, Adam Wainwright has now been added in that employee list. But what you'll notice here is that he doesn't have that user account, because in fact, that user account, if you notice, these are clickable. These are actually user person fields within SharePoint. So part of the difficulty in the process is, even when you go through and you provision account in Azure Active Directory, there is a little bit of latency between when SharePoint is aware of it, kind of. So what I ended up doing was building a timer job. And so it's sort of that fall through concept, with the idea being that if you, the first time it executes, it gets so far, and I know it's going to fail. It sort of intentionally fails. And so the next time it runs through, it's going to sort of fall down further, right? If you think of like, stair step kind of, it's going to get to the next step in the process. And so that way I know necessarily the whole process will take a couple run throughs. So by having a timer job, every time it executes, the process is going to get a little further. So let's again go back to, yeah, thank you for the reference, Ajay. It's perfect. So if we go, yeah, that's the link to the floor plan. So again, I'll walk through that so you guys can see that. So when they create the employee, it really just goes, they press the button and it creates a record. And then when we get through to this one here, we'll see what it does. Is the first thing it does is we have to figure out if they've been added to Active Directory or not, because we don't want to, like you say, if it runs multiple times, we don't want it to keep adding users to Active Directory. So what I do is I actually perform a get user from Azure Active Directory, with the assumption that if the user has not been created, this will not return null, but it will actually fail. So I have another scope statement here where the run after is set to if it has timed out or if it's failed. So the assumption is if the user is there, it won't hit this fail. And so it'll go right on. So what happens is it goes in and it creates that user account in Active Directory. Once it's created that account, then I go through a giant case statement, and I only have one in here, but the idea is that we'll determine what that department was. Say if you're in the IT department, we're going to add it to the group, the IT group that has that particular ID. And then it goes through and it tries to update it. So if we look at what executed here 1 minute ago, we will actually see that that's exactly what happened here. So if we look here, and we tried to do the get, and it failed, right? Because the user wasn't created yet. So then we go through and we say create user, but again, it failed on the update. So in the catch, I kind of don't do anything. There's nothing in there. It just, it gracefully ends, right? So it's not, it's sort of, I didn't want it to be a fail because it executed as intended, but it says, hey, that user doesn't exist yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to resubmit it, but understanding that in my scenario, it's a timer job, that the next time it executes an hour later, it would go through. And then it's going to go through. And this time we're going to see that when it does the get, yep, I found them. So it's going to skip the create step and it's going to move right on to update. And it's going to update that field with the value. So now if we go to this list and I refresh it, we can now see that it has a user account created. So let's go to Azure Active Directory here. And if we look at our list of users, we can now see Adam Wainwright was just added. And if I go into his groups, ta-da, he is now a member of the IT group. Yay! So there you go. We were able to go through and successfully provision that user within Active Directory. All right, so let's go on to the next step. The next step is we want to be able to notify people. Again, I made this part in the real solution. I made this sort of an automated step, but for the sake of example here, I also wanted to show how this can be a manual step as well. Right now, unfortunately, you cannot execute Power Automate scripts from, or flows from Teams. So in this case, I'm going to actually open up the list within SharePoint. And then I'm going to go to the next script, the next flow, not script, I guess, a flow. Hello. There it is, took a minute, which is notify a new employee. So in this step, this is what's going to do two things. It's going to send out an email that says, hey, this person is starting, and it's going to post to my Yammer community. So here is my inbox. And we just got the email that says, hey, this person will be starting on this date. And the next thing then is if I go to Yammer, we now see that we have a message to say, please welcome this person. I could probably add it to say who's starting on this date and all that, but here we go. It's an example. And I just wanted to point out another interesting thing about what we did at this client is we did build a new SharePoint intranet site using SharePoint Online to replace the on-premises site, but they're not really big adopters of Yammer. However, I was like, what Yammer does really good is it creates a way for people to be able to reply to things, right? So we actually have an automated script that uses the employee list. It's a flow and it executes every day. And it figures out, it calculates the start date for an employee, and it figures out if that's today's date. So if today, so basically it goes through employees list and figure out everybody who has a work anniversary based on their start date. And I use a calculated column, which is like month/day, right? It just takes the year off of it. And it says if that calculated column of month/day is the same as today's month/day, then it's their work anniversary. So then it goes through and it'll say, welcome, congratulate so-and-so on their 4th work anniversary. Or for their birthday, same thing, please wish so-and-so a happy birthday. So in the past, they were sending out emails to everybody, which to me was kind of annoying because in today's day and age, we're so used to being able to subscribe or unsubscribe from that stuff that some people really liked it and other people are like, it's annoying and I can't make it stop. So what we did is we actually added this community feed to the intranet homepage. So if you go to the intranet homepage, you can write a message that says, you can, on the homepage, you could say, welcome to the team or congratulations. And actually this way people, if they have a baby or get married, they also from the homepage could go in and, post a message too. So the automated flow would use the employees list to generate birthday and anniversary announcements. And then people also could sort of opt in if they wanted to add other information. An interesting request in recent months, though, which is sort of a newer idea, but again, getting into the idea that people are really used to opt in and opt out, is the idea that some people are like, I don't really want people knowing when my birthday or my work anniversary is. Some people are just like, it's none of anybody's business. So we actually added a field to that employees list of opt out so that if they didn't want their name up there, they could remove it from the script. Yes, Jay, this is probably, I hate to say it, but it's the truth. This is like the only time I've ever used Yammer for any client since Yammer's been invented. I'm so sorry to say that. It's just, I wish I could say differently. It's just not, yeah, I was really excited, Jay, to have a reason to use Yammer. Let's just say that.
I agree with you, except for lately I have been plugging Yammer in all of my knowledge management discussions, and it's been a nice plug. But I can concur with your with your thoughts there.
I'm with you. I think there's a time and place. You just have to have sort of an organizational will to implement it. I think that most companies are not at yet. Implementing Teams is the closest they get. So, okay. All right. So the next thing in our process then, so that's you actually got to see all the steps of creating it, adding it to a group, notifying people, putting it in Yammer. And the last thing is that office location, which is kind of our sort of last stop on this. So if we to work with that office location thing, the first thing is you'll notice this office. Do you see how this pattern here is kind of strange? Like 1 slash, and then we've got these other numbers in here, 17145. That is actually a formula that the office maps will pick up on. There's a reason for that. So at my client, I will just say there's, I said, hey, this office map thing is really cool. Do you have a CAD file of your floor plan? Because their office is only about 5 years old and it's a really awesome office. Very minimalist and cool. And they obviously put a lot of money and time into developing a very hip office space. But they said, nope, we don't have one. I was like, you don't have a CAD file? They're like, nope, but they do have a Visio document. And I was really excited. At first I was like, oh man. But then it turns out you can actually save, if you do save as, you can save a Visio document using basically as a CAD file. So if you look at AutoCAD drawing, it's .dwg. So as long as you save your Visio drawing as a DWG, you can make this work. Now, I have to admit, they just gave me their drawing. Working with offices and making sure all this data is set up properly is not for the faint of heart here. Even this concept of a telephone is sort of outdated because I just went to Visio and grabbed their like template. Because now if you're using Teams, it's not like there's a jack tied to that phone number. So even this concept is a little outdated. But if you look at the plan here, there's this whole concept about how this data is laid out. And I will freely say it is very confusing to me. So if you look at the data, you can see the department title, you know, how this is all set up. There's a very specific way to make these is what I'm saying, but over on the here you can see they've got conference rooms, office numbers, etc. But if we look at this, really, this office, this is the 17th floor, room 101. So even though this may be office 102, 103, it's labeled with the floor number in addition to that office number. So the concept here is we have a Visio diagram that's been saved as a CAD file, and the office numbers have that office floor and then the office number in there. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the Microsoft Admin Center. And if you go to the All Admin Centers and you go to Search and Intelligence, you're going to click, this is part of the answers, part of Search and Intelligence. The first thing you have to do is you have to add an office location. So our office happens to be located, you know, at the White House. So that's our address. And the purpose for this is just, you know, clearly some companies are going to have more than one location, right? So you need to say, what is this floor plan for which office? Once you specify the address of that office, then you're going to go in and you're going to start adding floor plans. So when you add a floor plan, what you're going to do is you're first going to select that building. Okay, I've already got a floor plan for the one building. So instead of showing you that, I'd have to create another one. I'll show you what I have here. So in select a building, we've selected that headquarters building, and then you're actually specifying, all right, the floor is the 17th floor, with the assumption that you know you would have a different floor plan for each floor, ostensibly. So this is where you would upload that DWG drawing. So what it's going to do is the search engine's going through and it's saying, you know what, I did not find any users. So it's not that it doesn't understand the floor plan. Actually, if I go through here, I can actually see all the labels in the Visio diagram. It's just saying I can't find any employees with an office location of 17101, 1702, etc. Well, the reason for that is our employees had a number of 1 slash that, if you remember correctly. So what I'm going through is it's saying, all right, intra building code. So in other words, you may not have a building code, in which case maybe your employees wouldn't have that one slash. So it's basically running through and trying, the search engine is trying to determine your sort of pattern. It's doing pattern matching of how you're mapping those employees. So when you go through here, then it goes, oh, okay, now that I know your the building number is building 1, hey, look, I found 4 employees with office numbers that match that number I found in the Visio diagram. So that's where you can know if you're on target. So as you go through, this is where it's saying, okay, so am I right? Did I understand this right? 1/17124 is the equivalent of building 1, floor 17, room 124. Is that right? Because in some cases you may have like hyphens instead of slashes. So again, there's a little bit of intelligence going on. So I'm not actually going to publish this because it'll kind of mess up what's already out there. Keep in mind, the first time I did this, it can take up to 24 hours for the search engine to crawl it, which is kind of annoying. But the nice thing is here, you can actually host Visio online. Using Visio online, you can actually host your Visio diagram in the screen here. And you can have information about the office location and directions to the office or whatever. And people can actually kind of zoom in. It's really kind of cool. And over here, we actually even have a space report, which is kind of neat that's in there. But let's go in and actually use that search engine. So say I'm searching for that IT manager. If I do search, if you notice here, I'm not getting any people results. So it's because the IT manager is a person. So I have to go to that organizational level. So if I look at it here and I click on the office location, it takes me to that office tab. Now I actually can see that that IT manager is in office 17124 that it picked up from that diagram. So let me do it again here. So imagine someone searching from office. I'm going to just do it here. This is one thing I want to show you, sort of a weakness of this. If I click on the, if I'm on office.com, not in a SharePoint site, and I click on the Becky right here, and it shows me my person card, that office is not clickable here. So that's something that's kind of a bummer. You literally have to make sure that you go to the search results screen, and this is where that pops up. So that part is a little annoying, but I think the part about seeing, you know, even if they have a profile picture, I actually see their picture there. So I think this is really cool if people are new to the organization and they don't know how to find somebody's office. The only thing that can sort of complicate this a little bit is that when I was trying to sort of advocate to my client, this is so cool, you should use it. They're like, yeah, we're moving to a hoteling model. And they're like, this is all in our hoteling software. So I was like, fair enough. But then after they said that, then they came back to the conclusion that, well, the people that said, I want to work from home, basically had a host of cubicles in the middle of the floor, but people who said, I would like to work in the office, basically were able, and they're entitled to like offices. So just pointing out that there may be some people that don't have an office number. They may be sort of mobile, you know, but this is nice for the people that do have an actual office, you know, cubicle location. So I just think being able to have that, if you click on see it on a map, I think it does. It's not taking us there. That's interesting. Again, there's sort of some, you know, it's not perfect, but it's kind of a cool little thing. So that is it for my presentation. There you go. Are there any questions about anything I've presented? We've got 5 minutes left. I'm curious at the end of this, how many of you, like, how many of you have automated your HR system? Have you done anything like that? I'm very curious after hearing this. What have you guys done? For the Active Directory, I wanted to point out that since we had on-premises environment, we actually created an Azure function that used PowerShell remoting, and then we used Power Automate to call the Azure function to call the PowerShell remoting to do that. It was really ugly, and the problem is it works, but error handling is terrible for that many steps. And I think there's a better way to do that now, but that was just one of the more difficult things, hurdles to get through since they're still on-prem. How many of you have done any sort of automation? Have you done anything? Is there anything here that you think would be helpful?
So we have something from Larita Smith that they've automated notifications with workflows and forms with SharePoint and Nintex, but none of the actual onboarding. And then Xavier, we're doing automation. We're doing an automate onboarding, but managed from ServiceNow due to this tool is our main place to do it. And that's a fair point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I actually also worked with a customer that was heavily invested into Oracle's success factors, and so we actually did like a hackathon to take a flavor of what you're doing in what you showed us today, Becky, but also automating the provisioning process between success factors and Active Directory, which would then sync up to Azure Active Directory, so that the AD creation process is automated as well based on a criteria within success factors. They've gone through background checks and stuff, right? So offer's been accepted, but background checks are done. So now officially I'm granting you an employee ID number and that kind of concept, but it's pretty cool.
That's neat. That's interesting because, yeah, pointing out that, again, there are other tools for going through those checklists as well. And so, yeah, it sort of depends on how sort of sophisticated those backend systems are. So the organization I'm at is a couple hundred people. So they're not thousands and thousands, right? And so sometimes the level of that information is, for sure, you've got to sort of accommodate that. Thanks for coming, Matt. Joseph, you said, how do you handle employee record item level security in SharePoint? So in this case, that employee list is only available to the HR team. If we need to use it somewhere else, we use Power Automate or a service account to query it if we need to, if it needs to be used somewhere else. But right now, all the flows and everything, again, have a service account with access to it. Really, if you're doing item level security in SharePoint, I just use the REST model, or you can use the graph to be able to set that up. But I usually SharePoint REST model to lock that down, the security wise. So I've done that for sure in Power Automate on a somewhat regular basis as needed. Okay, so Brian said, my inelegant solution to get the AD account created was to have Power Automate generate a CSV file from the SharePoint list, which got uploaded to the server with OneDrive. That created a whole new can of worms with OneDrive failing us occasionally. That's actually what my client did with Nintex. It was sort of the same idea. They actually, same thing. So for sure, that's a way to do it. And we did do it that way. I think the Power Automate tools are a little bit nicer, and if you need, again, using Azure, and again, the Azure tools are a lot better for that than even when we created this. It was right when some of those tools were becoming available, but that for sure is a tried and trusted method. But you're right, it introduces new complexity. Our issue with that hybrid connection is the hybrid connection kept breaking, and then it couldn't create accounts, and then setting up the hybrid connection was just a nightmare, so anytime you have that connection between on-prem and the cloud, is just, there's always that case that connection gets dropped, and that for sure is just some issues are fundamental, and I think I started programming I got into IT back in 1999, and even then we were message queues and all this stuff. There's been technology since time began between what happens when the message can't get from here to there. So whichever technology you introduce, there's always the element of I can't get from here to there, right? So again, I think the key is having that good error handling, which our solution, I will freely admit, does not, because yesterday the person at the client said, we haven't been creating accounts for the last month. We just, every time we get notified, we go manually create it in Active Directory. And I said, no, I had no idea the flow was failing, and I am trapping errors. And so I thought, clearly my handling sucks, that I was not aware that they were like, okay, well, let's go manually create it. So those things happen.
Yeah, and something else to add to that, Becky, is one of the things I'm also starting to notice among customers is in this whole HR, not just HR, sorry, this whole employee onboarding concept, when you get into identities, the question then becomes for different organizations, what is my ultimate system of record for all identities? Is it on-prem AD? Is it Azure AD? For most I've met with, AD is that, hey, this is my comfort area. This is my system of record. I can't change this. But there is a increasing a trend towards Azure AD as a system of record, and just having sort of played with both, if we could get Azure AD as a system of record, a lot of these automations become simpler. Like to your point about having a quirky way to execute a remote PowerShell function to do something, which becomes a case of that's how you provision accounts in AD. Like in today's world, if it's Azure AD, it's so simple. I have a Power Automate action literally to create an Azure AD account, right? With the attributes that
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
passing from my HR system. So just something that's sort of
Yeah, I think more and more. I mean, the clients are, I mean, the way I handle that is just it's the same way Microsoft is saying, if you want to keep your on-premises SharePoint, you can. But if you want to use this service or this service or this service or this service, it has to be in the cloud. It's one of those things where I'm just kind of like, all right, I get that your printers need on-prem activity or whatever, but every other service, if we're doing Teams, it's going to be an Azure Active Directory, or if we're doing this. And so it's sort of like making them dependent on Azure Active Directory for everything out here, so that by the time they decommission Azure or the Active Directory, there's only like 3 things that still use it, right? That's sort of the hope, right? Yeah.
fair enough.
So Terry, you said you're in the middle of HR and other IT that creates accounts. This could be very helpful. Awesome. Awesome. Are there any things in particular that stood out to you, Terry, that you think would be helpful in your organization? I don't want to put you on the spot if you, oh, being on Teams. Okay. All right. That in itself was an adjustment, especially organizations like HR are very skittish about their documents in Teams. And that's where I'm saying I don't necessarily want to say, don't put PII in there if you have a better system of record for it. But if people are uploading resumes or something, you have a secure place that are just document files that you can keep that as a document repository, or there are definitely other information that can be stored in Teams that may not be super sensitive, right? But it's a good place to keep track of that. And so, but using Teams as that dashboard for this whole process by having it in that channel and that team creates sort of, oh, you know what I didn't demo? I forgot to demo the creation of the Word document in the Teams. Oh well, I forgot that. But the IT team also having a place where they could get to that employee management was cool. So again, sort of tapping into the existing teams. So we're using all these other tools, but they're all being surfaced within Teams.
In fact, to add to that point, Becky, one of the things we added to this hackathon I was doing was we actually used Teams, to your point, as the onboarding platform in the sense that we would have essentially in this use case, this customer basically had a lot of attrition, right? So they were doing a lot of hiring. So each month they would combine, they would have a monthly sort of new employee onboarding, and they would have like 4, maybe 5 people. So they would create a team each month in an automated fashion, add those members to it, add the power apps, add the tabs and the channels corresponding to each onboarding process. Like here's week 1 of onboarding, here's what you should be doing in week 1 versus week 2, that kind of stuff. So Teams becomes that UI, to your point, about in terms of just trying to get stuff done from an
Yeah.
onboarding perspective.
And for that planner, I created them as buckets, but now that people have that tasks and to-do thing, then it really, you don't even have to use the buckets. It just becomes, I need to do this today, and people can prioritize and all that for sure. Cool. Well, thank you guys all for joining. I appreciate you jumping on board with me. I hope that this is provide somebody some ideas. And if yeah, if you, I hope for those of you from out of state or out of country that you'll continue to join our group, because we are happy to have other people members, and Jay is on the board of that as well. And so I'm sure, I know they're cooking up some ideas for the future. Thank you, and feel free to reach out if you have any other questions after the fact.
Becky, I think I'm echoing the group where we say this was an awesome presentation. So thank you for sharing. Appreciate your time. I will at this point stop recording.